Hey everybody, it's Ron. Every Monday through Thursday, we talk about how some event in business history reshaped the world. But on Fridays, we talk about something completely different. These are the stories that went completely off the rails. They may have still changed the business world, just not in the way anyone wanted. These are the business bloopers. The hearing room in the Russell Senate office building smelled like old wood and ambition, which in Washington is more or less the same thing. It was 1977, and the room was full. Staffers lined the walls, reporters filled the gallery. At the long, curved dais, Senator Ted Kennedy shuffled his notes and looked out over the witnesses assembled before him. Most of the people in that room were there to argue against the bill. The major airlines had sent their best people. The unions had sent their best people. The Civil Aeronautics Board, the federal body that controlled which airlines could fly where and what they could charge, had sent representatives who very much preferred that things stay exactly as they were. Regulated, controlled, comfortable. And then there was the man at the witness table with the wide grin and the English accent. Freddie Laker hadn't gone to university. He had left school at 16, talked his way into aviation, made his first million before he was 25, and spent the better part of a decade fighting governments on both sides of the Atlantic just to be allowed to sell cheap plane tickets. He wasn't a lobbyist. He wasn't a lawyer. He was a working-class kid from Canterbury who had built something, and he was here to explain why everyone else should be allowed to do the same. He told the committee what he had already proved in practice, that ordinary people wanted to fly, that they couldn't afford to, that the regulated fare structure that the big carriers hid behind was not protecting the public, it was protecting the airlines. That competition, real competition, would fix all of it. Senator Kennedy leaned forward. Stephen Breyer, his counsel, made notes. Fred Smith, a young entrepreneur who would one day build FedEx, sat nearby and nodded along. When Laker finished, the room felt different. The bill had momentum. Within a year, President Jimmy Carter would sign the Airline Deregulation Act into law. The skies, as they say, would be open. Freddie Laker flew home to London, having helped rewrite the rules of an entire industry. He had fought for the free market. He had won. The thing he believed in most was now going to be the law of the land. Of course, you know what they say. Be careful what you wish for. It might come true. So, okay, how did we get here? From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business Bloopers, the weekly podcast where we unpack the business decisions that sounded smart until they weren't. Every Friday, I'll take you through a real story where something went off the rails. Sometimes it's hilarious, sometimes it's painful, but always, it's a reminder that even smart people screw up in business. And we'll look at why it matters. This is Business Bloopers. Freddie Laker was not supposed to be anybody. He grew up working class in Canterbury, England, left school at 16, and fell completely in love with aviation. As I mentioned, he made his first million before he turned 25. He built a series of charter and cargo operations through the 1950s and 60s, and founded Laker Airways in 1966 out of London's Gatwick Airport. But the thing Freddie Laker really wanted was to let ordinary people fly across the Atlantic. In the early 1970s, a round trip from London to New York cost the average British worker several months' salary. Flying transatlantic was something wealthy people did. The big carriers, British Airways, Pan Am, and TWA, operated under the International Air Transport Association, the IATA. a pricing framework that kept fares high, blocked new entrants, and protected the established order. Freddie Laker spent 6 years fighting that system through courts on both sides of the Atlantic, and in Washington, where he testified before Senator Ted Kennedy's committee as one of its star witnesses in favor of deregulation. He had already proven his point before the law caught up with him. On September 26, 1977, the first Laker Skytrain departed London Gatwick for New York JFK. The fare was £59 one way. No reservations, no assigned seats, no meals. You showed up, paid, got in line, and flew. Passengers had queued overnight at Gatwick for tickets. Within its first year, Skytrain carried over 1 million passengers. The Queen of England knighted him. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher held him up publicly as proof that free markets worked. He expanded to Los Angeles, Miami, and Tampa. Laker Airways became the 4th largest transatlantic carrier in the world. There was just one thing Freddie Laker had not fully accounted for. He had fought to open the skies. What he hadn't fully reckoned with was that people already in those skies had a lot more money than he did. The big carriers did not take Skytrain line down. Almost from the moment Laker launched, British Airways and Pan Am and TWA began matching his fares on his specific routes. Not across their whole network, just where Laker flew. They could afford to lose money on those routes because they were profitable everywhere else. Laker needed every route to work. He saw what they were doing. He believed his cost structure was lean enough to outlast them, and he kept expanding. But that expansion required borrowing money. And here is where the financial structure of Laker Airways becomes the quiet engine of its own destruction and happens so many times. One of the things to understand is that aircraft financing was loans agreed upon in US dollars. That was simply how the industry worked. Laker bought his DC-10s in dollars and owed his debts in dollars. But his revenue came mostly in British pounds because most of his passengers were British. When the pound weakened sharply against the dollar in the early 1980s, his debt didn't change in dollar terms, but it became dramatically more expensive to repay in pounds. Think of it this way. If you borrow $10 million when 1 pound buys $2, you owe the equivalent of 5 million pounds. Now, the pound weakens and 1 pound only buys $1. You still owe $10 million, but now it costs 10 million pounds to repay it. Your debt has effectively doubled. Your revenue hasn't. The recession was hitting passenger numbers. The big carriers kept cutting fares on his routes. McDonnell Douglas pulled out of a financing deal. And you know what? His bankers got nervous. On February 4th, 1982, Freddie Laker was in New York filming a new Skytrain commercial when his bank called. They wanted £5 million repaid by 5 o'clock that afternoon. He didn't have it. The next morning, after a 4-hour board meeting at Gatwick, Laker Airways appointed a receiver to manage its bankruptcy and begin paying off creditors. 17 aircraft were ordered back to the United Kingdom. The British Airports Authority impounded a DC-10 on the tarmac to cover unpaid landing fees while the meeting was still happening. 2,500 people lost their jobs. 6,000 passengers were stranded mid-trip with worthless tickets. A public Save Laker fund raised over £1 million in days. Margaret Thatcher ruled out a bailout anyway. Now, it's important to understand that Freddie Laker was not the type to go quietly. He filed an antitrust lawsuit in the United States against 12 major airlines, including British Airways, Pan Am, TWA, Lufthansa, and Air France. His argument was specific. The timing and uniformity of the fare cuts against his specific routes pointed not to independent market responses, but to coordinated, predatory pricing designed to eliminate him. As the case progressed and discovery began, settling became more attractive than a verdict. In 1985, 10 carriers jointly offered $50 million to end the action. British Airways negotiated separately, paying $35 million to Laker's creditors and $8 million personally to Freddie Laker. A court later confirmed illegal cartel behavior had occurred. The man who had testified before the United States Senate that free markets would protect consumers had proven in court that the free market had been used as a weapon against him. He paid off his creditors, but the airline was gone. Richard Branson, who called Laker his mentor, launched Virgin Atlantic in 1984 and built exactly what Skytrain had proven was possible. EasyJet, Ryanair, and Norwegian Air followed in the decades ahead. The industry Laker fought to create got created, just not by him. And it's important to remember that the pattern Laker lived through didn't end with him either. In May 2026, this year, Spirit Airlines, the largest ultra-low-cost carrier in the United States, shut down completely with almost no warnings. Passengers arrived at airports to find empty check-in counters. 17,000 employees lost their jobs overnight. Debt, fuel cost, and larger competitors with deeper pockets had done what they always do to a budget carrier with no margin for error. 44 years after Laker's DC-10 was impounded on the tarmac at Gatwick, the story was repeating itself again. The names changed, the mechanism didn't. Freddie tried once more in the 1990s with a small operation out of the Bahamas. It folded in 1998. He died in Hollywood, Florida on February 9, 2006, at the age of 83. Richard Branson flew to Florida for the funeral. The skies Laker helped open are full of budget airlines today. He just never got to fly one of them again. Something I like to do when I share these business blooper stories is end by spending just a little bit of time looking what actually went wrong. So in this case, what went wrong? The easy answer is that the big airlines broke the rules. And that's true, the courts confirmed it. But that's not really the blooper, because Freddie Laker didn't control what British Airways did. The blooper is what he controlled and didn't fully reckon with. Laker believed in deregulation so completely that he built his entire financial structure on the assumption that the system would work the way he argued it would work. Open competition, level playing field, best product wins. What he underestimated was the gap between when the old rules come down and when the new protections catch up. In that gap, the people with the deepest pockets don't have to be better. They just have to outlast you. He also built with almost no margin for error. Dollar debt against pound revenue. Aggressive expansion that required everything to go right at once. Any one of those pressures alone might have been survivable. All three together, with nervous creditors, was not. The lesson isn't don't disrupt your market. The lesson is that believing in a system is not the same as being protected by it. Know the difference before you borrow in dollars. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business Bloopers, part of the Business Daily podcast lineup where we look at how business really works and sometimes how it really doesn't. New episodes drop every weekday with fun, full-length blooper stories like this one on Fridays and quick-hit business history episodes the rest of the week. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the ride, don't forget to leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And if you want to actually understand business better without the fluff or the buzzwords or the MBA language, start by visiting us at businessdailypodcast.com.